This summer, Ilana Savdie held a show of paintings and drawings at the Whitney. I want to focus on one painting from that show, Anquilosis. Savdie's paintings read to me as an extreme version of a particular type of violence. That is, the violence that occurs at the boundaries between bodies, slicing through membranes, penetrating the skin. The place where one body starts and another ends becomes entangled and fluid. This chaotic accumulation of biological forms is disorienting, and it has a disturbing openness. What makes Anquilosis and much of Savdie's painting great is the way that they are able to render this openness as beautiful and even seductive. So let's begin to examine this idea through the painting. We can read this section almost as the body cavity of some fantastical creature. Its organs are spilling, penetrated by the metallic pole wielded by the white-gloved hand that we can see towards the middle of the canvas. The splatters of paint around this wound lend some motion to the work, suggesting a thrust towards the right of the canvas. To the left, we see an aperture that is even less enclosed. Here, the forms are even more knotted and multifaceted, rising out of the ooze like a lava lamp just starting to warm up. We see an accumulation of body parts, slimy tendrils and forms coiled like snakes, clashing and writhing together. Here, Savdie plays with levels of realism and abstraction. All of the forms sit in an abstract amniotic haze. We can see this in the reds at the bottom and the purple hues towards the top of the canvas. We can make out a human torso, a foot and a blue-colored hand, all rendered realistically, but also the distorted and almost cartoonish figure draped, twisting around all the bodies. This is a break in realism which is seemingly pasted right on top of the paint. This figure is the Marimonda, a traditional character which appears in the Carnaval de Barranquilla in Colombia, where Savdie was raised. This figure wears a mask and is intended to mock the social elites during the carnival. It represents a sort of trickster, in Savdie's words.
It has this really kind of like trickster quality of being like vulgar and perverse and offensive, but also like bringing the kind of joy of the carnival. It also has this history that I discovered, which is is part of a costume that was meant to mock a kind of oppressive elite.
In Anquilosis, the Marimonda appears obliquely, deformed and easy to miss in the mess of body parts, but at the same time seeming to drive in the stake that forms the main axis of this painting's movement, a true trickster. And the contrast we see between modes of painting are intensified by techniques incorporating beeswax. Pigmented beeswax is poured onto large swaths of the canvas, and it allows for extreme areas of contrast rarely seen in painting. The way a smooth mask can be so abruptly interrupted by a clawed hand or a rib cage, or the wide gulf of color penetrated by the form of a slender metallic object, gives a collage-like aspect to some of the more built-up works. The beeswax components also do physically sit above the surface layer of the canvas in a single goopy shellacked layer. So we've definitely seen Slimy here. Let's get to the Saccharine. You can't look at one of these paintings without noticing the colors and maybe squinting to adjust your eyes. Let's hear about how the artist thinks about her use of color.
There's a word in Spanish, empalagoso, which I think is in English cloying is the closest maybe, but it's this like excess of sweetness and sugar to the point of disgust, and I think that like right in that place, like right before it gets to disgust, is like exactly what I seek in colors. And I think for me in this work, it's become about modes of seduction and finding like a way to kind of draw you in to look at something that isn't quite as beautiful or quite as pleasant as you might expect. And it's actually quite horrific.
This is one of the ways that Savdie manages to toe the line between the grotesque and the beautiful, the disturbing openness and the seductive. The colors are insane. It's really hard not to go up for a closer look when you're standing in the room with this canvas. They really do function in a novel way in Savdie's works, not just because they are as intensely saturated as the Carnival itself, but because they have a particular relationship to one of the most important aspects of life in the 2020s. There is something about the slickness of the colors that is eerily resonant for people who spend most of their time looking at screens. The colors are disturbingly smooth, almost digitally smooth. And Savdie's paintings make no direct references to the digital. In fact, they almost feel anti-digital in their elaborating organic forms. But it's hard to imagine their existence before the proliferation of screens and digital media because of one particular aspect, the gradient. In digital design, the gradient is a basic building block, a constant change in color between 2 points of a composition. The extensive use of gradient and vibrant color in digital design is best epitomized by the iconic Instagram logo, backed by a glittering yellow, pink, and blue gradient since 2016. Many of the interfaces that we interact with daily have mimicked this smooth, saturated style. In Savdie's paintings, expansive swaths of paint form similarly precise and uniform gradients from one edge of the color wheel to another. Nearly all of her painted works feature this type of unnaturally, we could even say algorithmically, smooth gradient. And while researching this show, I found that Savdie actually does use digital tools in her painting process. In an interview with Interview magazine, she says, "I start with a fairly figurative drawing. I look at a lot of religious Baroque paintings. Then I bring that drawing into digital space and Photoshop. I like to collage that digitally, and that's where I also play with color. All of these paintings have large sections that have wax-like paint, so there's this combination of these rigid boundaries and different ways in which I can infiltrate these boundaries. It all becomes leaking, spilling, sagging, or transgressing." This technique of using digital color with traditional materials gives the painting an ultra-modern feel. They repurpose the familiar, attention-grabbing goals of digital design to an overflow point, to the point of disgust. It's ridiculous. It makes us feel gross to look at, but there's also this attractive force that persists. Savdie's painting focuses on parasites, tricksters, and tangled bodies, on a particular type of violence that questions and transgresses the borders of skin and flesh. These subjects are explicitly not interested in respecting the boundaries put on and around bodies. But instead of terror, the overwhelming emotion is attraction, or at least macabre interest. And I think this is where the power of these paintings lie. Savdie's paintings are anthems of radical bodily freedom. They form a space in which the categorization of bodies breaks down, where organs and organisms interact in new ways, and where rules and borders placed around forms make little sense as everything begins to flow together. These paintings resonate loudly within a political context of extreme efforts to categorize, police, and limit bodily autonomy and our bodies themselves. Savdie highlights a societal disgust of losing control of our bodies, of losing track of their limits, and balances that with an intense attraction and beauty, of openness, of fluidity, of radical and absolute bodily freedom. That is what Anquilosis has to say, and it says it loud.